Good evening, everyone. It's such a pleasure to be here on this great day. Thank you, Mr. Harish Bhat, for uh, going to give the memorial lecture. Uh, Thank you, Ranjan, and welcome to all the participants who have come for this um, great lecture. Now, what I'm going to do is speak a little bit about Dr. Shrikant because I knew him from 1987. Uh, I will first talk a little bit about his background. You see, his father was a Gandhian and worked for the upliftment of Adivasis in Gujarat. That had an influence on him, and that developed Dr. Shrikant's character. He's very interesting. He studied BSc at Xavier's. Then he went to Illinois Institute of Technology and did engineering there. And then he went to Cornell and did his master's in business. During this time, he was working for Mukund Iron and Steel and became its chief executive. He retired from there, then went to Harvard and got his doctorate in business management. And after coming back to India, he went into consultancy. And in 86, he joined SPJIMR as its honorary director with a salary of rupees 1 per month. Well, with this background, there's one more thing I would like to mention that when he was at Mukund Iron and Steel, he developed a very interesting relationship with Mr. Chavan, who was the leader of the trade union. So, his whole background is Gandhian background, talking to trade union people and developing friendship with the trade union leader. And then that trade union leader's son, Madhav Chavan, started a great NGO for teaching. What all this did, and that developed his personality. One is he was curious, he was a lifelong learner. He had great intellectual width and depth. He was a visionary and he had great courage in taking decisions. And he had this heart full of service and of sharing. Now, this is his personality, which in a way helped SPJIMR to become the kind of institute it did. Now, talking about SPJIMR, in the beginning, Dr. Shrikant's strategy was focused on quality. Now, what does quality mean? Is first, the students were taken on the basis of competence, character, and maturity. Why is that? So they are suitable for business and they have the ability to learn and they are humble enough. And the faculty was a mix of academics and industry. They were adaptable. They had to have the willingness to learn. And there was a lot of coaching and mentoring done by Dr. Shrikant. And later, the senior faculty started coaching and mentoring the others. One more thing about students, there was no question of taking people on recommendation. It was purely merit based. One little example, the governor of a state, one of his secretaries called us up, called Dr. Shrikant, and I was present there, and said, you have to take this student who is so and so, or son of a secretary or something like that. So Dr. Shrikant's reply was something which I remember. He said, it's because of people like you that India is where it is. Please don't ask me such a question again. I was so impressed and I felt this is the place I want to be. This is the culture that I respect. Uh, so what was the process? The process was improve the quality of teaching. Why is that? If the quality of teaching improves, the students will be more ready for working in business. Then what we did is the changes that happened were curriculum, development of current and relevant curriculum. Dr. Shrikant would travel to the US every twice a year to find out what is the most current relevant curriculum and bring it in. Then one more interesting thing we started was specialization. This was not there anywhere. So marketing and information management and operations and IT. Then one more very interesting thing was non-classroom learning, which is, for instance, DOCC, Abhyuday, etc. Uh, One very interesting thing that shows its courage was we left Mumbai University because there was too much regulation on the curriculum and processes. And many students at that time felt very insecure. And they said something like, "We joined your institute because of Bombay University. Who is SPJIMR?" So, to which Dr. Shrikant's reply was very interesting. If you don't like this institute, you can leave. Now, in the middle of the 2-year course, they couldn't leave, the struck on, and that has helped. Uh, Now, what was the output? The placements became better. And because the placements became better, better quality students started applying. So, one into the other. Once this was established, the placement started happening, good quality students started coming in. Then the faculty also started, we are getting more faculty. Then came the stage of expansion. And how do you expand? His strategy was very interesting. What he called serving the underserved. So you look at the sectors which have been undermanaged and which don't have any programs available. So this was the time when the PGEMP was started, where they came every 2 months, executives who could apply whatever they learned in the 1 week per 2 months and per 3 months and come back. Similarly, what was done was the FMB, family managed business, where the focus was not only on application of what they have learned, but also on managing family issues. The third thing was PGPM, a 1-year program for people who are already working and cannot afford to go for a 2-year program. For them, the PGPM was started. And then the PGPDM for the development sector. So we are all the time talking about the underserved, and this development sector also was related to the DOCC that we had done. With all this, what happened was by 2014, we had become from number 3 among 3 institutes in Bombay in 86 to, to come into the top 10 in 2014. That was quite a journey, and a lot of the credit goes to Dr. Shrikant's vision, courage, and heart. Today, Ranjan Banerjee, the director, has taken it from good, is rather taking it from good to great, and we are progressing on that path quite well. It's great to belong to this institute. I am retired, but for me, it is like, I don't know how to say this, like a maika. It's my place, it's family. And this kind of feeling, I think, is there among all faculty and all students. Thank you very much. I hope I have not taken away too much of your time. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Kulkarni, for a wonderful exposition of what led Dr. Shrikant to actually set up the institute and the journey, with all the trials and tribulations to bring the institute to where it is today. It's actually been my proud privilege to know my good friend Harish Bhat for 33 years. I just realized that when I was looking at the years. And I'm delighted to introduce him as the eminent speaker delivering the 5th ML Shrikant Memorial Lecture, an annual event organized by SPJIMR. Harish is the brand custodian at Tata Sons. He joined the Tata Group in 1987 as an officer in the Tata Administrative Service. Currently, he holds the office of the chairman of Tata Coffee and is a director on the boards of several other Tata companies, including Trent, Chroma, Tata Starbucks, Tata Unistore, and Tata AIA Life Insurance. Before this, Harish has held several senior roles, like being the managing director of Tata Global Beverages and the COO of the watches and jewelry businesses of Titan. He has played a key role in the launch and nurturing of many iconic brands in the Tata Group, such as Titan, Fast Track, Tanishq, and Tata Tea. He is an alumnus of BITS Pilani and IIM Ahmedabad. He is also a recipient of the Chevening Scholarship for Young Managers, which is awarded by the British government. Harish is passionate about writing and is a prolific writer who contributes regularly to various national newspapers. He has published 3 books, including a book of fiction titled An Extreme Love of Coffee and the bestseller Tata Log, which narrates stories from the modern history of the Tata Group. It is this interest in business history and the deep insights gained from working lifelong in the Tata Group that eminently qualifies Harish to speak with great authority on leadership and values in the life and times of Jamsetji Tata, the illustrious, but possibly not as well known as he deserves, founder of the Tata Group. A quick housekeeping announcement. We will have a few minutes of question and answers at the end of the lecture, and Harish will be happy to answer a few of the questions. Kindly put them on the chat and we will share them with Harish. Harish, SPJIMR is greatly honored and privileged to have you deliver the 5th Dr. ML Shrikant Memorial Lecture, and I'm delighted to invite you to do so now.
Thank you very much, Prabhat. Greatly appreciate that introduction. Dean Ranjan Banerjee, Professor Anil Kulkarni, faculty and staff members of SPJIMR, students of SPJIMR, alumni of SPJIMR, and everyone who is gathered here this evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's my great pleasure and privilege to deliver the 5th Dr. ML Shrikant Memorial Lecture today. Prabhat, I want to thank you and I want to thank SPJIMR for inviting me to deliver this prestigious oration. Now, Dr. ML Shrikant, like Professor Kulkarni has mentioned just a few minutes ago, laid very strong foundations of SPJIMR over 3 decades. And I've read, and Professor Kulkarni mentioned just now, that he agreed to head SPJIMR on 2 conditions. One, that he would take up the post on an honorary basis, and he would enjoy autonomy in decision making. And I think Professor Kulkarni has given us examples of both. I've also read in a paper which was sent to me recently that when SPJIMR entered the top 10 business schools list in the country, he once said, we have 3 things that we do here: practice, values, and service. Anything that concerns these 3, we will do more of. If not, we will discourage it. Now, that's a powerful philosophy, saying that these 3 things matter: practice what we believe in, reinforce our values at all times, and be of service to society. So I want to start this address by paying tribute to Dr. Shrikant, to his leadership, and to these 3 values which he articulated so well. My lecture today, ladies and gentlemen, is on the same subject of leadership and values. But I'm going to examine these 3 aspects through the life of a person who lived many, many decades earlier, indeed more than a century ago. You might have heard of his name, and he's a person whom India is proud of. He's often referred to as the father of industry in India, the father of Indian industry. His name is Jamsetji Tata, and he was the founder of the Tata Group, which is the largest and most trusted Indian corporate house today, perhaps also the most visible Indian corporate name anywhere in the world. My question that I will try to explore today through the life of Jamsetji Tata are what can we learn about leadership and values from the life of this great man. A little bit of background and storytelling, I think, is the right way to begin. Jamsetji Tata was born on the 3rd of March 1839 to a priestly family of the Parsi community in a small one-story house in Navsari in the state of Gujarat. Later, at the age of 13, he moved with his family to Mumbai, studied at Elphinstone College here, and he developed a deep love of reading. Right from his childhood, his favorite authors were Charles Dickens, William Makepeace Thackeray, and Mark Twain. And I think, as I've read about his life, I think through his studies and through his extensive reading, he developed a wonderful and liberal view of the world. And that window expanded even further when he joined his father's firm. But the definitive step that Jamsetji Tata took was in 1868, when he set up a private trading firm with a capital of 21,000 rupees. It may sound a small sum today, but 21,000 was a reasonably large sum in the year 1868. And that was the start of the Tata Group as we know it today. So the Tata Group is 153 years of age this year. Very few firms worldwide would be prospering over 15 decades and more like the Tata Group has. 6 years later, he established his first major industrial enterprise in the city of Nagpur. This was a cotton spinning and weaving unit. It's called the Central India Spinning and Weaving Unit, but it's popularly known as the Empress Mills. So let me call it the Empress Mills. Now, the Empress Mills, which was his first industrial undertaking, was an extraordinary endeavor for this young man. And it also revealed his future promise. Let me tell you why. When other mill owners located their factories in Mumbai, because that was a large city, he chose Nagpur because it was the center of the cotton growing area of central India. He found the right people to manage this mill on his behalf, both the technical aspects and the administration. He understood the importance of product expertise. So in fact, he devoted a lot of his attention to improving the cultivation of cotton in India. He quickly invested in new manufacturing innovations, such as the ring spindle, which substantially improved the productivity of the factory. And Empress Mill soon became a very profitable enterprise, a testimony to the high quality of its products. And indeed, he was a very sharp businessman, indeed of Jamsetji Tata's business acumen. But believe me, mere profits, and it was indeed the most profitable unit of its time, were not the real reason why Empress Mills was such an extraordinary enterprise. Now remember that this was the 19th century, 1870s and 1880s, where human resource development was an unheard of concept. In that day and age, in 1886, in Empress Mills in Nagpur, Jamsetji Tata introduced a Provident Fund scheme for his workers. Today, you and I take Provident Fund for granted if we get our pay slips at the end of the month. This was the very first time the concept of Provident Fund had ever been introduced in India. A few years, just a year later, in 1887, he set up a gratuitous pension fund for his workers. 1887, a pension fund for workers. Once again, this was the first of its kind in the country. 1895, he established an accident compensation scheme for workers. As I've read about the history of Empress Mills, each year, not only did he organize a prize distribution event for his workers, with over 1,000 workers being called up to receive prizes on the dais. Many of them received gold and silver watches. Watches were, of course, at that point in time, as they continue to be today, very, very sought after. Later, the directors of these Empress Mills would establish creches for babies of women employed at the mills. I have seen pictures of these creches in the Tata archives, and they bring tears to your eyes, because at that stage, he encouraged women to work in the mills by creating creches for their children. He created night schools. Later, Empress Mills created a girls' high school for the community, which continues to prosper in Nagpur until today. Each of these were pioneering innovations. They were not pioneering innovations in the making of cotton. That he did using the ring spindle for weaving and spinning. These established actually a new way of doing business, a way of doing business by ensuring extreme care for the workers of an industrial enterprise. Even today, when I look at the care that the Tata Group takes of its workers, I am convinced that it had its roots in what Jamsetji Tata did at the Empress Mills more than 130 years ago. He gave very few public speeches, but I've come across one speech in the Tata archives where he spoke at an event in 1895 when a new extension of the mill was created because the existing mill was full on capacity. And he explained why he chose to run his business in this manner. He said, "We don't claim to be more unselfish or more generous or more philanthropic than other people. But we think we started on sound and straightforward business principles, considering the interests of our shareholders our own, but also the health and welfare of our employees, the sure foundation of our prosperity." Now, you may think that those are words, but if you go behind those words, it's actually fascinating to see how immersed Jamsetji Tata was in every single aspect of worker welfare. To him, this was of the highest importance. Take a small thing like ventilation in the mills. Here is what Jamsetji Tata says, his own words, at a speech in 1895. He says, "We have paid the greatest attention to sanitary arrangements in our mills, constantly studied the question with a view to improve them. We have provided fans for ventilation, humidifiers to prevent the effects of extremely dry air, couscous tatties for cooling the rooms, which must by the nature of our business get hotter in the hot weather. But we are still not satisfied with what we have done. We are about to try a new scheme in the shed. This scheme, we hope, will be a great improvement upon what we have hitherto done. And we are confident that if it does not succeed in anything else, it is sure to succeed in one thing. And that is in giving an equally distributed supply of free, fresh, and pure air to our work people." Now, this is the managing director of a company talking about ventilation arrangements in a cotton spinning mill and giving it pride of importance in a speech that he gives before the governor of Mumbai. He goes on to say, "For all these arrangements, we don't claim any credit. They've all been adopted with a view to do good to ourselves." Remember what he says, knowing fully well that our good lies in the good of those with whom we come in contact in business, or on whom the success of our work entirely depends. So look at the link that he's drawing in his mind. He says, in other words, the welfare of our workers is essential to the success of our enterprise. And to him, this was a bedrock of his leadership, commitment to his people. No wonder Empress Mills went on to become the most major textile mill of its kind at that time in the country. And it was not in the large cities of Bombay or Ahmedabad. It was in Nagpur, which was a much smaller town at that point in time. Now, this was Jamsetji Tata's laboratory, I would say, Empress Mills. This is where he perfected, or he started evolving some of the values of his leadership that he brought into play in later years. And that's why it's important to keep Empress Mills at the back of our mind. But soon, he started applying the same philosophy to virtually every single business that he established. To him, his employees and the community for which he made the creches, the employees for whom he made the night schools, they were at the core of every enterprise. Somehow his mind evolved at that stage to say, businesses should strive hard to be competitive and profitable. Make no mistake, Empress Mills returned a lot of dividends to its shareholders and was one of the most profitable units of its kind because of innovation, because of the high quality of cotton used. But he said that is not enough. Enterprises have to serve a larger need. And as he expanded the canvas of his activities, the meaning of the community also expanded in his mind. And eventually it enveloped the whole nation. And he said, if there is something I have to do in business, if there is something I have to do in industry, let it benefit my country as well. The love of India soon became the driving force of his life. So from employees to community to nation, he figured out that the job of leadership is not merely to run enterprises in a very profitable manner, but it is to give them a higher purpose to whom everyone within the organization can commit themselves, and that is to the nation. Now, let's go to a different story here. Empress Mills was prospering, doing very well. It became successful. But now Jamsetji Tata started dreaming of something else. This is way back in the 1880s now, about 10 years after the Empress Mills was established. He was reading extensively. And as he read extensively about roads and bridges and houses and construction and infrastructure, he came to the clear view that steel was essential for the development of his beloved country, India. Now, at that time, all the steel that India was using was imported from Britain and Europe. And he said, this cannot be. We cannot be dependent as a country on steel imported from England alone. We need to have our own capability of making steel if this is required for the roads and the bridges and the railways and the buildings of India. 1880s, India did not have an integrated steel plant at that time. And here was a man, a Parsi merchant who had established a textile mill in Nagpur, saying, I want to create India's first integrated steel plant. The British scoffed at his idea. You know, there's a famous story which is narrated by R.M. Lala in The Creation of Wealth. Sir Frederick Upcott was then the Chief Commissioner of the Indian Railways. He was the British Chief Commissioner of the Indian Railways. And when he heard that Jamsetji Tata wanted to put up an integrated steel plant in India, he's reported to have said, do you mean to say that the Tatas proposed to make steel rails to British specifications? Why? If they succeed in making it, I will undertake to eat every pound of steel rail that they make. Now, that was the skepticism and that was the scoffing which the British had in mind when they examined, when they looked at Jamsetji Tata's determination to put up an integrated steel mill. But Jamsetji Tata had a new steely determination. And that determination was driven by his belief in what the country needed. He went and met the Secretary of State for India in the UK, in London, Lord George Hamilton. He convinced him that India needed its own steel plant. So Lord George Hamilton said, okay, if you think so, if you're willing to invest your own money, go ahead. But the question was, where would he find the expertise to put up an integrated steel plant in India? Something that had never before been done in our country. India did not possess the capability. We did not know where the coking coal was. We did not know where the iron ore was. So Jamsetji Tata said, and it's easier said than done, he said, I will get the world's best expertise to my country. I don't know what he must have felt at that time. I've often tried to put myself in his mind, which is difficult. In his heart of hearts, he must have known that it was not an easy task to attract the foremost global technologists from the US or from Europe to the heartland of an underdeveloped nation that India was at that point in time. Did that stop him? Absolutely not. He went all the way to the United States of America by ship. The voyage must have taken several days. He went to the steel city of the United States of America, Pittsburgh. He met people there to understand, what should I do to get this capability of making steel here back in India? They tried to discourage him. They said, it's expensive. Are you sure you want to do it? And Jamsetji Tata said, yes, I'm sure I want to do it. You tell me, how can I get the capability there? Eventually, he was told, Julian Kennedy, who was one of the metallurgists of Pittsburgh, told him, the right person who can help you start a steel mill in India is one of the most eminent consulting engineers of New York, and his name is Charles Page Perrin. You get him, and he'll help you start the mill. But don't ask me whether he'll agree to come with you to India. But Jamsetji Tata had made up his mind. For the sake of his country, he said, he would attract Charles Page Perrin to India. Now, here is on the global stage, he was an unknown Parsi industrialist and merchant from India. He's now planning to go to New York to ask the most eminent consulting engineer of New York to come with him, live in India, and create a steel mill for him in India. Some of you could say he was embarking on a foolhardy exercise. But listen to what happened next. And what I'm going to read out now is not Jamsetji Tata's words. These are the words of Charles Page Perrin, that consulting engineer. He has described his first encounter with Jamsetji Tata. And here's what he says. I was poring over some accounts in the office when my door opened and a stranger in a strange garb entered, who was, of course, Jamsetji Tata. Imagine a Parsi merchant in a heavy white Parsi dress with his turban entering the office of the most eminent consulting engineer of New York. in his wood-paneled office. He walked in, he leaned over my desk, and he looked at me fully a minute in silence. Finally, he said in a deep voice, "Are you Charles Page Perrin?" I said, "Yes." He stared at me silently for a long time, and then he slowly said, "I believe I have found the man I've been looking for. Julian Kennedy has written to you that I'm going to build a steel plant in India. I want you to come to India with me to find suitable iron ore and coking coal and the necessary fluxes. I want you to take charge as my consulting engineer. Mr. Kennedy will build the plant wherever you advise, and I will foot the bill." He looked at him once again and said, "Will you come to India with me?" Now here's what Charles Page Perrin says. He says, "I was dumbfounded naturally. But you don't know what fire, what character and force radiated from Jamsetji Tata's face. And kindliness too. Well," I said, "yes, I will go." And I did. That is the story, ladies and gentlemen, of how Jamsetji Tata got to India, the best consulting engineer in the world, to set up Tata Steel. I have reflected on this remarkable story so many times. I first read this as soon as I joined the Tata Group, and I have reflected on it many times until today. An unknown Indian merchant walking into an office in New York unannounced, attracting the world's best consulting engineer from that great city to the jungles of eastern India, which is where the steel plant was about to come up, in an unknown location, all in his very first encounter. That kind of strength can only come from character, courage, and determination. And that kind of strength and determination can only come from your abiding love for a higher purpose, which in Jamsetji Tata's case was love for his country. Ladies and gentlemen, Charles Page Perrin came to India. He left New York and came to India. He helped Jamsetji Tata establish Tata Steel, India's first integrated steel plant, after prospecting for coal and iron ore in the jungles of eastern India. By 1913, the first ingot of steel had rolled out of the factory at Satchi, which was later christened by Lord Chelmsford as Jamshedpur, in tribute to Jamsetji Tata. That ingot was forged not merely by fire. I believe it was forged by Jamsetji Tata's courage and determination in the service of India. And Dorab Tata, who was Jamsetji Tata's son, referred to Sir Frederick Upcott. I told you about the guy who said, "I'm going to eat every pound of steel." And he said if Sir Frederick Upcott were to keep up to his promise, I think he would have a slight indigestion now. In fact, the rails made by the Tata Group, the steel rails, fed the Allied war effort in World War I. And the British were very, very grateful to Jamsetji Tata and India for supplying those rails to the Allied World War I effort in the fight against Germany. Not just that, Tata Steel has gone on to achieve great heights. Now, of course, beyond Jamshedpur, there's a new steel plant in Kalinganagar in Orissa. There's Tata Steel in Europe. Tata Steel has spread its wings and is seen as the finest institution of its kind in the country today. But the history goes back to Jamsetji Tata. And I think in this entire episode, determination and courage are the values of leadership that he demonstrated in going to the US, going to New York, and having the gumption and audacity to say that I will attract the best in the world to India to help set up a steel plant for the sake of the country. So I have, the two stories that I have narrated to you so far. One of them reflects care for people in the community. That's the story of Empress Mills that I spoke about. And the story I've just narrated to you about Jamsetji Tata and Tata Steel reflects courage. Both are values of great leaders. If you look at great leaders across the world, I would think most of them have deep care for the people who work for them. And most of them, if not all of them, are people of great determination and courage. I believe that these also reflect in Jamsetji Tata's case a higher purpose, love for the community and country. But let me quickly move on to another story which brings alive another dimension of his leadership, which I think is equally important. And this is a very different story. It's not about an industrial enterprise, because a textile mill and a steel mill are still, something an industrialist would dream of. But this is the story of a great university that Jamsetji Tata dreamt of and founded. And it's very appropriate that I'm speaking at SPJIMR when I say this. You know, as Jamsetji Tata read extensively, and as he surveyed the future of India, he came to a conclusion that advanced education in technology and science was essential for the country's progress. Actually, in 1892, he established the Jamsetji Tata Trust for the overseas education of Indians, where he agreed to provide loan scholarships for Indians who would go outside India to the best universities in the world for education. But he soon discovered that, you know, scholarships to go abroad can only be given to a few people because it's very expensive to go abroad for education. So he said India needs its own university of research in science and technology, higher studies and research in science and technology. India had good universities of the arts in those days, but India did not have at that time a great university of scientific research. So what did Jamsetji Tata do? He had to step beyond the boundaries of industry. He was, after all, an industrialist and a merchant. He now understood that it was important, if he was stepping outside the bounds of industry and doing something at large for the nation, to evangelize the need for such a university. The first person he went to was Lord Curzon, the British Viceroy. Lord Curzon listened to him and he said, would there be enough students? He wondered, would students from such a university find acceptable employment opportunities? Could such a university in India attract faculty of the best talent? Finally, who would provide all the enormous funding that such a university would require? And the British government clearly in the beginning was not willing to do it yet. Once again, Jamsetji Tata was unfazed by these questions. But he knew that this was a national university. He knew that he would have had to gain much more wide-ranging support than for a single steel factory. And so he did this with great vigor. He didn't reach out only to other industrialists. He did that as well. But in 1898, he wrote a letter to Swami Vivekananda. He had met Swami Vivekananda on a sea voyage a few years earlier. Both of them were traveling towards the US. Jamsetji Tata was on his way to attend the Chicago Exposition of 1893. Swami Vivekananda was on his way to address the famous, meeting of religions where he delivered his famous address, Sisters and Brothers of America. That's when he had met Swami Vivekananda on the ship. He now wrote to Swami Vivekananda, seeking his help and support in galvanizing this mission of a science university. And he said, I am seeking your help in publishing a pamphlet, rousing the people of India towards this national endeavor. Swami Vivekananda responded promptly. By 1899, he had published a clarion call in the Prabuddha Bharata, the monthly magazine that he had started. And in that clarion call, Swami Vivekananda said, no idea more potent for the good of the whole nation has seen the light of day in modern India. Let our whole nation, therefore, forgetful of class or sect interests, join in making it a success. So he evangelized opinion in favor of this university from one of the most charismatic Indians of that time, Swami Vivekananda. He then took the scheme to the Maharaja of Mysore. He took the scheme to the Maharaja of Mysore through his enlightened Diwan, Sir Seshadri Iyer, and he requested the Maharaja, telling him, can you help by providing me land for this university? I think after a few meetings, after a few discussions, the government of Mysore eventually offered a large parcel of land from amongst its palace grounds in Malleshwaram in Bangalore. But even after such help, enormous funds would be required for the buildings, the laboratories, all the other facilities, attracting excellent faculty at a world-class university. Where would these funds come from? For this purpose, Jamsetji Tata publicly announced that he would set aside his own properties worth 30 lakhs of rupees to create an endowment which in turn would provide funding to this university on a recurring basis. Now in 1898, 30 lakhs of rupees was a fabulous sum of money. It's equivalent to several tens of crores of rupees today. But more importantly, 30 lakhs was also 1/2 of his overall wealth. Here was a man saying, 1/2 of my overall wealth I am setting apart to create a university of higher science and research in technology in India. The other half of his wealth he left to his two sons. Sometime if you get the opportunity, you should read Jamsetji Tata's will. It's a very interesting document in its own right. He calls this dream project the Indian University of Research. He leaves it 1/2 of his wealth. And then he directs his sons, who are his successors, that if any additional funds to this are required, please ensure that you provide those funds as well, so that this university can get created. Actually, a few people thereafter have called this university Jamsetji Tata's third son. This is what, ladies and gentlemen, led to the birth of the Indian Institute of Science in Bangalore as we know it today. You may call it Indian Institute of Science or IISc. It has been and continues to be the finest science university in our country, in any ranking that comes out, and amongst the finest in the world. It has nurtured Nobel laureates such as Dr. C.V. Raman. It has nurtured eminent nuclear scientists such as Dr. Homi Bhabha, amongst many, many other eminent names, which one can name all the way until today. Even today, it's a matter of pride and prestige for a student to get admission to study at the Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore. Interestingly, Jamsetji Tata also believed that such a university belonged to the nation. So he refused to give his name to it, which is why it is called the Indian Institute of Science, and the Tata name is not associated with this institute. But this story reveals to me two other abiding characteristics of great leaders. First and foremost, if they believe in a cause, they evangelize that cause with passion. Remember that with Lord Curzon, with Swami Vivekananda, with the Maharaja of Mysore, with Sir Seshadri Iyer, with the citizens of India, Jamsetji Tata went out of his way, stepped outside the boundaries of being an industrialist to evangelize this cause. Second, it demonstrates another characteristic of true leaders. True leaders have a generous spirit. In this case, Jamsetji Tata was not just generous with his wealth, which of course he was. He was also generous with his energy and his time. He was in the midst of building a steel plant. He was in the midst of building the Taj Mahal Hotel in Mumbai, which itself must have occupied so much of his time. And then he goes and spends a lot of time and energy traveling to Bangalore, meeting the Maharaja of Mysore, writing to Swami Vivekananda, who is in Kolkata, Lord Curzon, who is in Delhi, evangelizing the need for this institute. The amount of energy and time that he was generous with to create this university, just because he thought it was so important for the nation. And I believe that's a value that true leaders have. And I've seen many other leaders with similar values. They have a generous spirit. They want to give and give until it hurts. I'm using the word of another leader of the Tata Group whom I have worked with in the past. They're generous with their wealth, both material and intellectual. So, this brings me actually to the final point of my lecture today, as I run out of 30 minutes to deliver this oration. I have narrated 3 stories to you today from the life of Jamsetji Tata to illustrate some important values and characteristics of leadership. I wish I had the time to narrate many more stories. I could narrate to you the story of the Taj Mahal Hotel, the story of Jamshedpur city, the story of the Tata Silk Farm, the story of a shipping line which Jamsetji Tata founded, the story of Tata Hydroelectric which came up in Valban and Lonavala. But to demonstrate the values of leadership, I have narrated these 3 stories. The story of Empress Mills demonstrates leadership with a deep care for employees. The story of India's first integrated steel plant, Tata Steel, demonstrates sheer determination, willpower, and courage. The story of the Indian Institute of Science demonstrates evangelization of great causes and a generosity of the spirit. If you reflect for a moment, you will notice that all these stories also highlight a pioneering spirit, a quest to do something that had never been done before. What happened in the Empress Mills, what happened at Tata Steel, what happened at the Indian Institute of Science was all for the very first time in India, right from the Provident Fund to an integrated steel plant, to science university. And that is a very important characteristic of leaders too, the ability to stake out new ground, the pioneering spirit. But the question for us is, and the question that I want to leave behind with us for our consideration is, where do these values spring from? What gives rise to these values? What gives birth to care for people, such deep care for people? What gives birth to determination? What gives birth to courage, to evangelical zeal, to generosity, to a pioneering spirit? Where do these values come from? If each of us aspires to being good leaders, good people in our respective spheres of life, whether we are business managers, whether we are academics, whether we are researchers, whether we are students, what will galvanize us with these and similar values? This is not a comprehensive set of values. There are many other values which mark out great leaders. I have pulled out a few from Jamsetji Tata's life. But what will galvanize us with these and similar values that mark out true leaders from the rest? And here, as a student of business history, the only answer, I've considered this question, and the only answer that I come to time and again is that these values spring forth from a sense of higher purpose. In Jamsetji Tata's case, this purpose was the love for his country of birth, India. He wanted Indian textiles to prosper. Therefore, care for the employees so that he could get the best textiles in the mill, and that was the right thing to do. He wanted to build India's first integrated steel factory. He wanted to build India's first university of higher studies and research in science for the nation. What he wanted to do was, of course, to create profitable enterprises, but he wanted to do for his nation. That was, whether the Tata Hydroelectric project or the Tata Silk Farm or the Taj Mahal Hotel was also with similar intent for the nation. That purpose was at the very root of the values he exhibited. I believe that when you have a higher purpose, any great and useful purpose, in his case, it was love of the nation. You could have another purpose in your life. But if you have a higher purpose in your life, which is a useful purpose, which drives you in life, then these noble values of leadership, these noble values of living, whatever leaders we are or whatever managers we are or academics we are in our space, these noble values tend to flow naturally into our lives. If Jamsetji Tata was a man of destiny who brought India into the industrial age, this was because he put his purpose in front of himself. And therefore, his life provokes us to ask ourselves the question, to what purpose, large or small? It could be a large purpose, it could be a small purpose. But to what good purpose are we dedicating our brief lives on this earth? And that's a question, I think, that all of us, it would be worthwhile for us to consider in our lives. What purpose, large or small, do we dedicate our lives to? May I end, ladies and gentlemen, with the words of Lord Sydenham, who was governor of Bombay in 1912. And he said this of Jamsetji Tata when Jamsetji Tata's statue was being put up in Mumbai. He said of Jamsetji Tata, wealth came to him in full measure, but he remained to the last what he was by nature, a simple, modest gentleman, seeking neither title nor place, and loving with a love that knew no bounds the country that gave him birth. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Harish, for the wonderful and evocative storytelling, which really brought out the outstanding leadership displayed by this great Indian, and how, as you say, the values of genuine concern for multiple stakeholders, courage, and generosity of spirit, held so close to his heart by Jamsetji, led him to undertake, and successfully at that, some remarkable missions of nation building in his lifetime. And of course, he's left a legacy behind, carried forward by the group. While we're waiting for some of the questions to appear on the chat, because you referred to the Taj Hotel, and because we are in Mumbai, I want to start by asking you a question. There seem to be multiple versions of stories on what prompted Jamsetji to set up the Taj Hotel in Apollo Bandar in Mumbai in the early 1900s. I mean, it started earlier, but it got completed in the early 1900s. It'll be wonderful if you could share the real reason to do so, and how, again, building this grand hotel reflects on the values that prompted Jamsetji to do this and many other things he did.
Yeah, that is a fascinating story, Prabhat. And actually, there are so many versions of it. So thank you for giving me this opportunity to narrate the story. Um, it goes back to the purpose in his life, but let me describe the story. Jamsetji Tata came home one day and he told his family members, listen, I'm going to build a great hotel in Mumbai. Apparently, his sisters were very upset with what he said. He said, you're in the midst of building a steel mill, you're thinking of building a university, and here you're trying to build a hotel as well. No, he had gone to an auction of the Bombay Port Trust. And at the auction, he had got the lease for a 5.5-acre plot of land to build a luxury hotel on. Now, the story which often does the rounds is that Jamsetji Tata built the Taj Mahal Hotel because as an Indian, he went to the Watson's Hotel in Mumbai, and there he was told that Indians should keep out of the hotel. It's meant only for Europeans. But that's not truly the reason why he built the Taj. In fact, he was not a petty person to build a hotel just because he was asked to keep out of another hotel. The reason was, and this has been examined by many historians, in the 1890s, Prabhat, just like we have gone through the pandemic just now of the coronavirus pandemic, which we are still going through, in the 1890s, Bombay was struck by the bubonic plague. It was much worse than the current coronavirus pandemic. There were millions of deaths. Millions of people left Mumbai. And Mumbai city was down on its knees because of the bubonic plague. Visitors stopped coming to Bombay. And the city looked forlorn and desolate. And Jamsetji Tata is reported to have told the then editor of Times of India that, listen, I want to get visitors back to Mumbai. I want to create a new face which represents the new fascia of Bombay and which brings pride and glamour back into this great financial capital of India, which is the city that I love so greatly. And he thought of the Taj Mahal Hotel as the new building which would transform the skyline of Mumbai. And it did. When the Taj Mahal Hotel came up in the year 1903, remember that the Gateway of India had still not been built. It was yet another 20 to 30 years before the Gateway of India would be built. The skyline of Bombay came to life with this luxury hotel. It was the first building in the city of Mumbai to use electricity. He got lifts from spun iron pillars from France. He actually got an ice making machine which would, blow air over ice so that rooms could be naturally air conditioned. He got Turkish baths into the hotel. And he created a hotel which was luxury by any name. And this brought visitors back into the city of Mumbai. So the real reason why Jamsetji Tata put up the Taj Mahal Hotel was after the bubonic plague, to ensure that Mumbai could attract visitors from all across the globe once again, because it was indeed the financial and the trade capital of India. Of course, the Taj Mahal Hotel is a building that we are very proud of. It has withstood, one more pandemic after that, the Spanish flu of 1918. It has withstood 2 world wars, both the First World War and the Second World War. It has withstood a terrorist attack. And believe me, the Taj Mahal Hotel is not, I don't see it, and I think no Indian sees it as just another luxury hotel. It's seen as a very, very proud symbol of India. And it was a proud symbol created for Mumbai city after the pandemic. So that same sense of purpose, Prabhat, what can I do for my city, what can I do for my country, appears to have guided most or all of Jamsetji Tata's actions during his lifetime. It's a wonderful story. There is more detail to it, but this is the short summary.
That's that's wonderfully told, Harish. I'm now going to ask you a question which is certainly related to the subject you're talking about, but focuses more upon the future. And this is from a colleague, Devraj Ghoshal, who again very proudly says that he's ex-Tata. And the question is, what should our students do to develop leadership skills relevant for the future?
So I think, Prabhat, a few things that come immediately to my mind. One is, I believe that, a good way to look at what great leaders have done is to read through their biographies. When you read the biographies of great people like Jamsetji Tata, or Mahatma Gandhi need not necessarily be from business, or they could even be from business, like Steve Jobs, for instance, or it could be other business leaders like an Akio Morita. Um, you could take or JRD Tata in India, or it could well be Richard Branson, or you could take business leaders from across the globe. Each of these leaders demonstrate more than one value of great leadership. So I think reading extensively about these people, what in Abraham Lincoln, you read about Abraham Lincoln's biography, and you know how he was able to go through some of the most challenging moments of the Civil War in the United States of America. Or you read Mahatma Gandhi's biography and look at, none of these people were perfect. They all had their imperfections, but they still show you what some great characteristics of leaders are. So that's one thing that students can do. The second is, Prabhat, I think in our own lives, begin practicing some of the, it's not possible for, certainly not possible for me, or for many of us to aspire to the heights that great leaders have achieved, except with rigor and with practice. So, for instance, I talked about courage and determination. I talked about generosity. In our own way, in our own small lives, is there a way we can practice courage and determination? Can we bring courage and determination to helping members of our family, to helping our friends in college, to helping our colleagues when we join a company? What kind of courage and determination comes to the fore? Eventually, that is the courage and determination that we will develop and take with us when we become leaders of enterprises. Can we bring generosity in our stride? Are there small acts of generosity that we can perform, even though we may not be earning as much as Jamsetji Tata did or a business leader does? What are those small acts of generosity? Not just generosity with money, but generosity with time, generosity with effort, generosity with mentoring. What are those small acts of generosity we can do? So I think if you realize what the values of leadership are and see which of them we can practice in our own life, I don't think, Prabhat, there is anything more powerful than practice, because practice also takes you through all the difficulties and challenges of practicing each of these attributes of leadership. So those are two quick answers there. Read about great leaders and begin practicing some of these attributes in small ways in our own lives.
Thanks, Harish. Great tips. A very short question. A question which hopefully will evoke a fairly short answer. Which book would you recommend reading, highlighting the stories of Jamsetji and the leadership lessons to learn from this great personality? This is from our alum, Manish Tandon.
So I think, Jamsetji Tata's biography is written by Frank Harris. There's a biography of Jamsetji Tata. It's a book which was initially published in the 1930s. It's a longish book. But the book which actually brings to life, Prabhat, the philosophy of Jamsetji Tata and of leaders after him, like JRD Tata as well, is a book called The Creation of Wealth, written by R.M. Lala, who was a historian of the Tata Group for a very long time. It's a very readable book. It's published by Penguin in India. You can get it off Amazon or in any bookstore. It's the first book that I read about the Tata Group when I had joined the group way back in 1987. So if there's one book I'd like to recommend, I think Creation of Wealth by R.M. Lala is a good book to pick up. It's written as a story. It goes beyond Jamsetji Tata, of course. It has stories of Jamsetji Tata's life, but it goes beyond Jamsetji Tata into future generations of the Tata Group as well.
Harish, we could go on and on, but I'll have to leave it with the last two questions, and I'll request you to be brief because I'm cognizant that we've gone beyond the appointed time. The first question is from a colleague, Rupal Walia. She asks, while leaders are visionary, they need the support of their fellow workers to achieve their goals. Could you throw some light on how Jamsetji motivated those who worked with him? I'm also going to relate the second question. It's different, but you can keep that in your mind. Could you share the story of courage at Titan Tanishq, where you were a leader yourself?
So two things here, Prabhat. The first one is through the story at Empress Mills, I've spoken about Jamsetji Tata's deep care for his workers, and that extended to workers, to members of his immediate team. And he was able to build, I think, a very, very trustworthy relationship with key members of his team. So I don't have the time here today, but at some time I should speak of Burjorji Padsha, who ran the Empress Mills for him, who also did a lot of research into the University of Science getting set up, and other members of his leadership team. Dorabji Tata, of course, his son, was yet another member of his leadership. He was a partner. So was Sir Ratan Tata, and so was R.D. Tata, J.R.D. Tata's father. So actually, Jamsetji Tata, while he was at the helm of his enterprise, there were 4 partners of Tata and Sons. And then there were very senior leaders under them as well, Gurjotji Padshah being one of them. So I think it was a combination of this leadership team, Prabhat, which supported him very strongly in the execution of these ventures. But of course, the deep care for his employees, which comes out in the Empress Mills, was one reason, I think, that he also won great trust from the people who worked with him. In fact, you should go back and read, I don't have time to narrate this today, but the extraordinary care that Empress Mills took to inoculate its employees during the bubonic plague. We are talking of vaccination today, but I'm talking now of 130 years ago, inoculation against yet another plague which struck us. On Tanishka, Prabhat, on Rupal's question, truly speaking, I was not the leader at that time. The courage for the turnaround of Tanishq, and I participated in that. I was the retail and marketing head in Tanishq, and thereafter the chief operating officer. But the courage to stay with Tanishq and make it successful actually came from Xerxes Desai, who was the leader of Titan. He is the person who refused to believe people when they said Tanishq cannot be successful. And I've gone and spoken to him. I wrote a book called Tata Log a few years ago with a few contemporary stories from the contemporary history of the Tata Group. And one of those stories is about Tanishq. And I went and spoke to Mr. Xerxes Desai. Unfortunately, he's no longer alive. He passed away 3-4 years ago. But when I spoke to him, he said, we saw the huge market opportunity. We saw the opportunity to transform the jewelry space in India. Naysayers were telling us that, organized jewelry will never succeed in India. Branded jewelry will never succeed. Family jewelers are the be-all and end-all of India. But he said we saw the huge market opportunity. We saw the amount of impurity in the market. We saw an opportunity to transform this market. So he said, Harish, over my dead body, I would have let anyone shut down this business. He fought those battles in the board of Titan and made sure that Tanishq survived. And after that, of course, people like Jacob Kurian and Bhaskar Bhatt took it forward after Mr. Desai's tenure. I'm very privileged to have been part of that journey and proud that I played a role in the turnaround of Tanishq. But if you ask me, that courage was demonstrated by Xerxes Desai. And Rupal, if you read my story on Tanishq in Tata Log, it brings out many facets of that courage. Not very different from what Jamsetji Tata demonstrated, when he went out to get an expert to come and found Tata Steel.
Thank you, Harish. Actually, sorry, I forgot to mention that the second question was by another colleague, Shushmita, who's again got a Jamshedpur connection. The first question was really by Rupal. But thank you, Harish. That was wonderful. And now I have another friend of yours, Dean Ranjan, who wants to come in last.
Thank you, Prabhat. Thank you for those questions. Thank you, Sushmita. Thank you, Rupal.
So I think it is my pleasure to deliver the vote of thanks. So first, let me thank Professor Kulkarni for the lovely introduction, Prabhat for bringing Harish and convincing Harish to join us. Harish, sorry we did not give you as much notice as we normally need to give a speaker of your stature. But Harish, it was wonderful to listen to you again. And of course, Harish is a personal friend and he's a friend of SPJIMR. There is a lot that we have done with him over time. I will speak briefly of some of the issues, and I was reminded by listening to Harish of a statement that is attributed both to Robert Kennedy and George Bernard Shaw. Different versions are attributed to these people, which basically says, some see the world as it is and ask why. I see the world as it should be and ask why not. And I think that this is a commonality that you see in Jamsetji Tata and Dr. Manish Shrikant. One of the things for all of us, Tata is today a great edifice. We believe SPJIMR has the potential to become a great institution. And I think if that is true, then many of us who will follow in the footsteps of a giant, we should always be cognizant of the fact that if we build buildings that look good, it is because the foundation has been laid by somebody else. And we must recognize the foundation and learn from the qualities. At SPJIMR, we talk about courage and heart, Harish, where courage is the courage of your convictions and heart is the caring for other people. And this is a very, very strong principle that comes. Finally, I will say this, I have introduced interacted with Harish Bhat many times, and I think Harish has this quality of being gentle, value-based, a great storyteller, and is himself a leader to emulate in his own right, and a very humble man. So Harish, it's a pleasure, and I think we couldn't think of a better person to deliver the 5th edition of the Empress Shrikant Memorial Lecture. Thank you so much again. Thank you to all who are sitting through this lecture, and thank you for the questions that they've asked. Thanks a lot. I think we have done justice. And Harish, there will be a booklet published, so we will look forward to sharing the booklet of this memorial lecture with you. It was a pleasure to listen to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dean Ranjan Banerjee. It is my pleasure and privilege to speak at SPJIMR. I have come to your institute on several occasions in the past, and I have great respect and regard for SPJIMR and everything that the institute and you have achieved. Please accept my heartiest commendations and best wishes to SPJIMR for the future as well.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody. This lecture is now closed.